I have the right to remain silent. Nobody said I have the right to remain silent.
Donkey, you have the right to remain silent.
The Miranda rights, whether it's from TV or a movie or heard it on the radio, we're all vaguely familiar of what the Miranda rights are. They're the things that police say before they arrest you. But for most people, myself included, I don't know anything else past that.
Look, it obviously starts with you have the right to remain silent. I know you've heard this before. And then I think it sounds something like, well, the thing, you have the right to remain an attorney.
What are the Miranda rights? Why do they exist? Who's Miranda? Well, the Miranda rights are a product of the Miranda versus Arizona case, which happened in 1996. But before we get into this monumental case, we need to learn a bit about the context behind the case and why the case even happened in the first place. On March 13th, 1963, Ernesto Miranda was arrested in his house for kidnapping, rape, and robbery. He was taken to the police station where he was lined up and identified. At this point, Ernesto was not informed that he had the right to an attorney or had the right to remain silent. After 2 hours of interrogation, the police obtained a written confession from Miranda, which was used as evidence in his trial. The jury found Miranda guilty of kidnapping and rape and was sentenced to 20 to 30 years imprisonment on each count. Miranda appealed to the Supreme Court, claiming that his confession was unconstitutional. These events in this claim are what led to Miranda versus Arizona. Miranda versus Arizona addresses Miranda's claim, in addition to 3 other cases in which defendants likewise made confessions and provided information used in court without full and effective warning of rights prior to investigation. These cases include Michael Vignera versus New York, Carl Calvin Westover versus the US, and the state of California versus Roy Allen Stewart. Miranda versus Arizona was argued February 28th to March 1st of 1996, and it was decided June 13th. 1996. The plaintiff was Miranda. The defendant was Arizona. The question that the court had to consider was whether or not the Fifth Amendment's protection against self-incrimination extend to the police interrogation of a suspect. The final vote was a 5-4 decision for Miranda. The Supreme Court ruled that the prosecution could not introduce Miranda's confession as evidence in a criminal trial because the police had failed to first inform Miranda of his right to an attorney and against self-incrimination. In other words, Miranda's 5th and 6th Amendment rights were violated in obtaining his confession. Therefore, his confession is illegitimate. The majority opinion was written and delivered by Chief Justice Warren and joined by Justices Black, Douglas, Brennan, and Fortas. The dissenting opinion was written by Justice Harlan, accompanied by Justice Stewart and White. This is a quote from the majority ruling that explains why exactly Miranda's confession was unconstitutional and could not be used in his trial. And it also explains the importance of having something like the Miranda warning put into place so that those who are arrested are aware of their 5th and 6th Amendments. When an individual is taken into custody and is subjected to questioning, the privilege against self-incrimination is jeopardized. Procedural safeguards must be employed to protect the privilege and to assure that the exercise of the right will be scrupulously honored. The following measures are required. He must be warned prior to any questioning that he has the right to remain silent, that anything he says can be used against him in the court of law, that he has the right to the presence of an attorney, and that if he cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for him prior to any questioning if he so desires. After such warnings have been given and such opportunity afforded him, the individual may knowingly and intelligently waive these rights and agree to answer questions or make a statement. But unless and until such warnings and waiver are demonstrated by the prosecution at trial, no evidence obtained as a result of the interrogation can be used against him. And that was Chief Justice Warren. So was Miranda's conviction upheld or overturned? The Supreme Court overturned Miranda's conviction in its ruling for Miranda versus Arizona, which established guidelines for how detained suspects are informed of their constitutional rights. In the trial, Warren says, without the proper safeguards, the process of in-custody interrogations of persons suspected or accused of crime contains inherently compelling pressures which work to undermine the individual's will to resist and to compel him to speak where he would otherwise do so freely. Miranda was in that interrogation room for 2 hours. He never did anything. So obviously he's going to give them a confession if he doesn't know any better. So not only was the case overturned due to the violation of Miranda's rights, but it also prompted a call for action. So how did the ruling of Miranda versus Arizona benefit society? Well, give us the Miranda rights. So what's the significance of this phrase, this passage that law officials read to us? First off, and probably most importantly, public knowledge. Not everyone knows what their rights entail, and so these are the safeguards that Warren was talking about. This is what needs to be said to people so that they are aware of their privileges and their rights. Miranda rights facilitate a balance between law enforcement and the general public by reminding everyone that our rule of law is based on inalienable individual rights that cannot be ignored. These are the rights people can understand that they have a right to a lawyer. They know they have the right to remain silent and are in no way obligated to answer questions asked by the police. And they fully understand all the rights that they're waiving. It also benefits society in means of accessibility. It gives people accessibility to the rights that they have but may not be aware of. So in that regard, related to public knowledge, but also if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. I feel like this is important because a lot of people who are arrested may not know and may be unaware that an attorney will be provided for them if they can't afford one. The third way that the ruling benefited society is that it allowed accountability. It established a code of conduct for police interrogations. Because of the ruling, law enforcement has become accustomed to reading suspects his or her rights. Now law enforcement says it all the time, and they probably don't think anything of it because it's just so routine. So why did I choose this case for my presentation, and why does it speak to me? I know my rights. The phrase itself has become so convoluted through the growing prevalence of tension and conflict between law enforcement and the general public.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
For some, these rights are used to justify actions and behaviors of malicious intent. For others, the rights are what protect them from becoming victims of those acting unlawfully. The result of Miranda versus Arizona ensures protection from my own ignorance to my rights and reassures that I can rely on an attorney, whether it comes in the form of a letter of written consent, like we've discussed in class, or in the form of the Miranda warning. Public knowledge is the great equalizer that gives clarity to our expectations and, more importantly, allows us to make informed decisions.